Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second day of Game Days. We will continue with the second talk that will be focusing on narrative and designing a narrative game combining pen and paper and choose your own adventure game, which are two different genres, and I'm really looking forward to it. It is my pleasure to welcome another representative of Slovak game development scene, Andrej Vojtáš from Poetic Studio. So please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, everyone. So our talk is called Sacred Fire, and we can start with the first frame. Okay. So the subtitle is Reinventing Role-Playing for Video Games, which suggests that my take on the role-playing game genre is quite different than what the mainstream offers. Let's start with a short introduction. Who am I? So I have studied on business school. I worked in the mainstream as a designer and scriptwriter. Then I went indie and did a lot of freelancing. And for the last 5 years, I've been focused on this task, reinventing the role-playing experience in video games. But it's, of course, my subjective take on what role-playing means for me. So I founded Poetic Studio and created this game, Sacred Fire. So we are in the process of developing it. What's the game about? So we say it's an introspective tale inspired by ancient Caledonia and challenge the player to build a character strong enough to avert the tragic fate, which basically means that the game mechanics set the player to compete with the story itself. So there is a default ending that is quite tragic, worse than that. And the player has tools how to build his character to withstand going down this path. So it's all about simulating the emotional state of the character. So what will be the talk about? We will start with specific Sacred Fire screenshots and examples, so that the context of all I'm talking about is more easily understandable. Then I will go in depth how I came up with the design, what's the origin story of the project. And then I will talk about, so the origin story is basically a deconstruction of the role-playing game genre, and the last part is the reconstruction, the pieces that fit into my design of role-playing in video games. And we'll go through a production briefly. What you can see on the right side, the Quantic Foundry gamer motivation profile is basically what explains in one picture the whole game. This is my gamer motivation profile. There is Quantic Foundry is a cutting-edge company. They have like 400,000 surveys, and they developed a statistical method. And statistically, the 6 major motivations for players to play very different games are these 6 motivations. And what's specific about mine is that it's leaning very strongly only towards one of these motivations, which means that my design will be also leaning to a very specific implementation of a genre. It's been quite the revelation for myself. Quantic Foundry has a talk. You can find it online from the GDC 2019. And it explains a lot. And I really recommend to take the survey, fill out your favorite games. There is a recommendation engine. You can find games you have never heard about that could be interesting for you. It's also very useful when you do collect feedback as a developer. If you get feedback and there is a gamer profile attached, you know how to interpret it so much better. So let's start with the examples. The whole point of creating new mechanics was not only to create a role-playing experience that caters to my gamer motivation profile, but also to develop game mechanics that support better writing that has not been possible in games. You can find a lot of articles telling writers how to adapt to games. And my take on it is that it's always about the design of the specific game, what game mechanics it has, that force the writer to adapt his skill set and his mindset to this very specific genre or game mechanics that are dominant in the genre. If you develop new game mechanics, you don't have to adapt so many writing principles, and you can write different stories about different content. And another focus of our game design is based on the psychology or the talk from Sid Meier, the creator of Civilization, about how to achieve immersion through the game design. So this is the first example that our game mechanics are about calculating the probability of your character successfully making a story choice based on his emotional state. So you can see up there he's scared. And that influences his probabilities. And as a writer, now I have tools to write a choice that in other games would be irrelevant. There would be no game mechanic to pick up the consequences of interpreting a dream. What's special about Sacred Fire, that we have a psychological model of the personality of the character, and it picks up the consequences of choices like this. This is how it's interpreted in the UI, and so interpreting the dream, a nightmare, as something, as a warning from the gods, increases your favor. Favor is basically the strength of your belief that you are protected, which is quite common in Asian cultures. If you lived up to a certain age and most of your peers were gone, you came to a conclusion that there is a purpose for your life. And it's a very interesting narrative concept, and it's present also nowadays in tribal societies. These elders perceive danger and fear very differently because they believe to have been protected through their lives. So the personality model is based on the statistical model we use in real psychology, the big 5 personality traits, but it's also geared toward the ancient culture and the specific story of leading a resistance war in ancient Caledonia against the Roman invasion. Another layer that good writing needs are interpersonal conflicts. And what we do in the game, at the bottom, close to the continue arrows, that there is a probability chance how the story will continue based on the NPC, the other characters, the story characters' reaction. So there is a relationship model that tracks how the character perceives you, and the story branches not only based on what you, the player, select, but also how the character decides. And this is just a dialogue scene, but it can have, in a different context, can have dramatic consequences. And there is a long-term strategy and reward for the player for building a relationship, removing relationship, what we call blocks, by being patient and empathic towards a character. And this is another way how we connect story and game design. That there are always many layers of consequences to your simple story choice. So one is it's shaping your personality, affecting your emotional state. The other one is it affects how you are perceived and the relationships to other characters. And it's all captured in a abstract rule set as a strategy game like Civilization would use. And the last layer of conflict for good storytelling is external conflict. And the innovation here is that your performance in battle and even your ability to choose certain strategies or tactics is hindered or empowered by your emotional state, which again connects story and gameplay, that your story choices shape your character, which influences how resistant to anger and fear you are, and then it finally influences your performance in battle. And the loop is closed because your performance in battle, again, is captured by the other characters, and they have more respect towards you, and you rise as a leader. And it impacts the story, because in the story it matters the numbers you have, in the relationships, in the respect, in the influence. There is a mechanism of the other story characters rising and falling in influence as well, and you compete with them. It's again inspired by Sid Meier's Civilization, where you compete with the AI empires. So now in the story you compete with the story characters, and when you reach an important point where the group decides what to do next in the resistance fight, your influence can change the course of the story. Another moment our game mechanics enables is that you have to earn the right to make a tough choice, to stand by your companion when you are overwhelmed. In other games, you would simply choose to be a bad guy or to be a good guy. And I find it so much more satisfactory when you have to pay for it, or where you earn it by being consistent for a long time and building either the strength of your character and the percentage to stand your ground is not only about you, but also about the attachment your character develops to the story character. So if you are being nice to a character, it's not only the response you get from them, but it makes it easier for you to be selfless towards the character as well. And the last example is that our game mechanics enable me as a writer to let the player self-express himself in a nuanced way, and he can choose his motive, why he's doing a choice. And as mentioned before, it's all about the gamer motivation profile. Whether you care about playing the role and expressing yourself in the story, or whether you are motivated by something else like mastery of the numbers or other game mechanics commonly found in other role-playing games that Sacrifice simply doesn't have. So it's geared really toward role-playing game fan who prefers the story, the interaction with the characters, and being someone else, somewhere else, and staying in character is perfectly fine. Dying as a character doesn't mind the defeat as long as he's playing his role. And there are other players who would never stay in the character and who their goal is to win the game. So this is the second part of the presentation, and it's about the origin story of the design and how we came up with Sacred Fire. It all began with the pen and paper experience. Many of you may remember one of the first rule sets available in this region and one of the first personal computers. And I was a fan of both, and I kind of expected that the computer could solve a lot of the problems we were having at the pen and paper session. All the calculations of the numbers and dice rolling would be taken care of. And I expected to keep all the ability to role play, to guess who is the ally and who is a foe in the group, to come up with creative ways how to solve problems and be rewarded for it. And these were my favorite things about a pen and paper session. But the reality of the video games was really different. To this day, I remember one of the first role-playing games I played was Eye of the Beholder 2. And it was at a friend's computer, so I played it once a week on Saturday. And it took us 3 months to figure out how to control the thing. All we knew was how to navigate the space and how to throw objects at the monsters, because throwing an object actually did a little amount of damage. So if you threw all your inventory at a monster, you could kill it. And that was the only way how we knew how to defeat the monsters. But later and all I remember from that game is this funny story and this one situation that actually after all these levels of mazes and fights and physical puzzles, there was one story choice to help or to kill a monster. And it just shows that I do really well even in real-world navigation. It's such a blessing to have a navigation in my cell. I couldn't find my way here without it. So to go through in your spare time when you want to enjoy a game to go through something that you are not good at, it breaks the immersion. And this will be a recurring theme in the task, that it matters in your design what you ask of the player to master to win the game. And very often, and we have fancy names like ludonarrative dissonance and the inherent conflict of gameplay and narrative in games, but very often it's all about that you attract, to a narrative game, you attract a gamer whose motivation is to explore the story and explore the characters, but you ask of him to master a completely different skill set, to flip the page of the story. And this is what we are trying to solve with Sacred Fire, that someone who is interested by the story, by the characters, has nothing more to do than to understand the story, understand his character and the others. There is a little ballast of the abstract rules, but they use the concepts that are relevant to the story. It's not an abstract physical puzzle, etc. We will see that later. Then I encountered Fallout 2. Is one of the very few games I actually finished, so it means I really liked it. But still I couldn't help but feel that after the character creation, it went downhill for me. It wasn't as good. I wasn't so motivated. The character creation was a space where I could project and role play and express myself. And then I was tasked with a lot of things to do to flip the page in the story. And the repetitive combat, as amazing visually as it was a drag for me. Then there was a huge hype from Peter Molyneux about this new type of role-playing games, where your personality will be really dominant and the focus of the design. And then I got to kick around chickens and fight a dragon in the end. So I was really thinking that someone in the world surely sees what's wrong with the role-playing genre and has figured it out. I was even a little bit disappointed that someone else would come up with the idea, but there is plenty of space still to make the role-playing game catering to someone who cares about characters and story in the world. So I really didn't enjoy any aspect of this game. Then the MMO revolution came, and I had high hopes to try it out. And I just couldn't understand what the appeal was. And I just saw a design that wanted to waste my time with traveling, with the shops were in a huge location. It was all, for me, it was all geared toward paying the subscription for the next month. And I'm very proud to say that I only wasted 7 days of my precious life in all the MMOs of the world. So, but there were other games that really resonated deeply with me, and I enjoyed a lot from the role-playing game genre, and even completed some of them. I really like Dragon Age Origins, and for the first time in a game, I encountered a situation that I could reflect on in my real life and realize that I am, in a way, prejudiced towards certain characters in the real world, and that I could view them differently. And that was a strong impulse for me, that strong writing and strong characters could provide a meaningful experience and not just waste your time. The aspect I didn't like about Dragon Age Origins was To flip a page at one place, I had to clear 7 levels of an infested mage tower, and at the top there was a boss fight that was really long, and just before you could kill the boss, he sent you to another dimension, and you had to solve puzzles as a mouse. It was so completely absurd from a storytelling perspective, diverting the pace. And I'm sure a gamer motivation profile that fits the game exists, but it was really out of place for me. Then I found a role-playing game I really liked, but it was really bad received by the reviewers, because obviously no one cares about the good story in a role-playing game. And it's understandable from a business perspective that there is a historical reason how the genre was formed, and now the audiences already exist. So the studios are not in a position to cut something out from the design that their existing audience loves. But if you attend the talks of people from Obsidian, like Josh Sawyer or Tim Kaine, you will see that it's not the designers who really want to have all these features there, but they are locked, catering to an existing gamer motivation profile defined audience. And then there was Witcher 3, and I grew up reading the books, and I really loved the visuals, and I loved the story. But still, and this is the first time I'm commenting on it, I didn't enjoy it, and I didn't finish it, because there were many mechanics, and I was tasked with many things that are not appealing to me to master, to progress the interesting and meaningful story. And what was always perplexing me as a designer was that I knew that I was interested in stories and characters, but I really enjoyed playing Civilization, and it was not just like a nostalgia thing. So I studied a little bit up about the design behind it, and curiously enough, Sid Meier's design fits very well for my design of Sacred Fire in many ways. And that was like a start of a revelation to study things and to find the theory behind the game design that would clarify things, what to pick from the games and what to focus on. And this is a really recent addition to my understanding of game design, and it's the Quantic Foundry gamer motivation model. And basically this one slide explains my 30 years of frustration with the role-playing game genre, because I live in the immersion space, and the role-playing game genre encompasses a lot of mastery and achievement and discovery, etc. And it's perfectly fine. But our reception when we ran the Kickstarter campaign suggests there is a lot of people who would like to experience a different role-playing game, and that's what we are catering to. This is a famous quote from Sid Meier, which strengthens this belief that it's okay to focus on one gamer motivation profile, and actually that it can, for this specific audience, create a better game than if you have the inherent conflict of a story-driven player wanting to flip the next page and a mastery and achievement-seeking player wanting to skip the dialogues and get to the next fight to see how his min-maxed warrior is doing and experience the winning in the game. Another quote that is quite famous is, "A good game is a series of interesting choices," and obviously it makes a lot of sense for the strategy genre, and it makes a lot of sense for my genre. Another really important influence, so how do you write interesting choices, was this book from Robert McKee. It's written a really, really long time ago. And the one thing that stuck with me were the 3 levels of conflict I opened the presentation with: the inner conflict, the interpersonal conflict, and the external conflict. And this has far-reaching implications, not only if you have the game mechanics to write all the levels of conflict, can you write different stories, but it also, for me, explains why there are not many story adaptations of famous movies, movie franchises, TV shows, books into games. When we adapt The Lord of the Rings, out comes Shadow of Mordor, which is a brilliant game, but it doesn't interest the same audience as the moviegoers or the readers of the book, because they are tasked with a lot of skills they don't have and they don't find fun to master. So there is a real business case to be made, that if we can come up with game mechanics that don't ask of the player to master anything else but the understanding of the story and the characters and basic human psychology, we could bring all these audiences that consider themselves maybe even non-gamers or just narrative gamers to adaptations of works that don't, for example, feature external conflict. You have many movies or genres or books that are really, really successful, and the content of the book, like Pride and Prejudice, romantic books in general, the chick flick franchise of 5 Billions, Twilight, there is no game adaptation because there is not really a lot of external conflict. What would be the game about? So that's the potential, not only a business case, but also to expand what the medium of games can do to let the people experience their favorite characters and stories in a different context. Another important thing from the writing theory was subtext. And it's a very, it's a good point. The quote is a good point. And what it means for us is that on the surface, it's a story about 2 brothers rising in the resistance and choosing how to survive, basically, in a war against a much stronger opponent, Rome. But the real story we are telling may be something like, it's open to interpretation. The story can be that all we have are all these little choices to stop us from falling into the abyss. The abyss being the tragic ending, worse than that, where you betray everyone and everyone dies because of your treachery. So this is what we hope to achieve. That in each scene we have game mechanics that give a lot of subtext to the choice. So maybe the literal choice is whether you help someone or not, but the game mechanics creates a lot of subtext because it changes your personality, it changes the dynamic of the relationship, and there is the long-term consequence of both things. And this is what basically I was hoping to achieve in our build that we now have, and this works fine. So now I will switch to another theme. I already foreshadowed. What does the player need to do to win the game? I'm sorry about the layout. So it's based on another famous quote from Sid Meier. He calls it the unholy alliance between the game designer and the player, which basically is about I, the game designer, will let you, the player, be the star of the game. I will pretend that you are good at what you do, at building empires that stand the test of time in civilization. And the deal is that you will pretend that the game is real, and will suspend your disbelief and will immerse yourself into the game more easily. And this is actually really important, and comes back to my point that we don't really let the gamer immerse himself into the narrative if we ask of him to be a master of many skills he doesn't have. So he likes the story, he wants to know what's next, he likes the characters, but he's not immersed because he's fighting the UI, he's managing the inventory, he's getting lost in a maze, he's getting bored with the position-based, party-based combat, if that is not his cup of tea. So the goal for me was to define how can we establish or evoke this feeling of being a star in a purely narrative game. How do you win a narrative game? And I went back to my experience playing the role-playing session with my friends, and the rewarding moments when you felt that you are winning the game for me were when I figured out how to gain an edge in a situation and came up with a creative solution to a problem, when I figured out the room who was playing against me, who was playing with me from the people sitting across the table, when I came up with something how to impress the others or to express my role and enrich the experience for everyone for presenting a more believable character in the world. Or when I figured out what the game master was hiding from us, the players. These were the rewarding moments, and this is what inspired the design in Sacred Fire to enable a player that doesn't have quick thumbs or tactical thinking or navigational skills to be a star in a game. What now follows is a quick overview of what do you need to be a star in an old school computer role-playing game. And then there is a green mark matching what translates to a pen and paper session. And as you can see, there is a lot of things you need to master. So what I'm trying to get at is that it's geared towards a completely different player. And there have been some indie role-playing games recently that address some of these ways how to be a star in the game. And the mainstream is asking less of the player, but still there is a lot of things that for someone like me are an obstacle. It's the same with the old adventure games, that to progress the narrative, you had to do really, really arbitrary challenges like pixel hunt the screen, combine the items in really illogical ways to progress, or you simply needed to draw a map to keep track of everything. Then there are more recent indie adventure games that present these challenges to progress the narrative, and the mainstream adventure games recently, be it the Telltale, it's a Telltale game, it's not The Legend of Grimrock, or a more famous example is Detroit Become Human, where, again, if you are interested by the story, characters, there is still a lot of things the game routinely asks you to do to progress the story. It's basically a dilemma for the game designer when he wants to tell a story and he doesn't want to be criticized that this is not a game because there is no challenge. So he has like a set of challenges he can give to the player that have traditionally been in the genres that are narrative. So this is what we basically see. That someone wants to tell a story in the game, and then he picks an arbitrary set of challenges, be it puzzles, be it position-based combat, be it on a chessboard like Banner Saga, or it's just 2D space like Darkest Dungeon, or these QuickTime events that are popular on consoles, where you have to quickly press the correct control button. And it's always been a source of breaking the immersion for me. So what we try to do in Sacred Fire is to let the player be the star of the game and asking of him to master a skill set that is more in line with a person that enjoys storytelling and characters. So this is now the final part of the presentation. So Sacred Fire strictly adheres to a pen and paper session rhythm. The game master tells you this is happening, and then the game asks you, what do you do? You select what you do, and you can be creative about it. You can be like take the first obvious choice, or you can think about more tactical options, and it's all in the writing for you to discover a better way how to gain the edge. And then there is a probability, so roll a dice to see what the outcome of what you chose to do is. And then the loop continues. The outcome of your dice roll, this is what happened, what do you do? So there are no arbitrary challenges, like navigating a maze, etc. And the challenge comes from conflict resolution. Of course, it comes also from mastering the rule set, not in a sense of min-maxing, building the best and strongest character, but you have to understand a new rule set, and it takes time to get used to. And some people don't like numbers so much, or numbers don't speak to them, don't carry the information. This is what we are trying to address in different game modes, where instead of probabilities, we just say low, medium, or high. Your chances to succeed are expressed in a word. But what we task you is to resolve conflict, which should be a much closer match and skill set to a person primarily interested by the story and role-playing. And the mechanics we invest heavily in is the reactivity of the story. so that the story picks up all the nuances that the writing has and lets the player express himself in an unprecedented way. The feature set the game has is the character creation. And one of the most important things is the story branching, so that you really can take a distinct path through the game. This represents the first chapter, the first hour of the game. And as you can see, you can skip a lot of scenes. You can make choices that are life and death choices about other story characters. You can basically save or let die or even kill other characters. So I will mention it briefly in production. We are really focused on, when building the game, to have the ability to add a choice. We have a feedback button in the bottom right corner, and we collect feedback from players. It's also for bug reporting, but also if someone says, I really would like to do this and this in this situation. So we have the production set up in a way that it's efficient and easy to add a choice. But currently, so another feature we came up with is to change, break the pacing a little bit, is a risk chain, which is breaking the pace of this is what happened, what do you do? And it's just a flow of probability checks. And once you reach the end of the risk chain, the failures and the successes, based on how many successes of the risk chain you did, there is a different outcome. It's basically useful in slow motion, like actiony scenes where you do a sequence of moves or take another risky path. And then we have, as a feature, psychological combat supporting psychological tactics. So you can intimidate your opponent or pretend fear. It's barely visible. Something we clearly have to fix in the UI. There are altogether 12 tactics you can use besides classical attack and defense. And the duels are really rare. So it's basically a boss fight in each chapter that feels unique and has unique winning conditions attached to it. So just to repeat, this is what my design goal was: to immerse the player, let him be a star, and let's cater to someone who has the skill set of being a star in a role-playing game session. And these are the examples, how we do that, how we let the player to gain an edge. So before combat, he can coordinate the firing order with his allies and stuff like that. So the writing allows you to gain an edge if you are patient enough. Then you can go deeper and try to understand. The writing allows you to stop and understand the story character's motivation. For example, this character in the middle, Igren, is giving you a hard time, and you can stop and think why she is doing that, and understanding the character affects your emotional state and the relationship, and then you have better chances to resolve the conflict more peacefully, if that's what you want to do. Another writing principle is that we always prepare for the player the situation to be smart, to be tough, witty, brave, even reckless, if that's what can impress one of the other story characters. Be it in a physical conflict or in emotionally sensitive situation with a vulnerable character that needs to hear hard facts, and you can gain respect for taking the time to explaining it gently. So these kinds of situations is what we wanted and prepared the game mechanics for the writer to be able to implement. And the last thing, how to make the player feel like the star of the game, is to let him express himself and let the game pick up these self-expressions and give him feedback. And this is happening in dialogue or in combat, where you can twist the blade in the enemy, or you can let him die peacefully, or you can avoid killing him altogether. So it's on the very literal level and also in a very nuanced way. And then there are Easter eggs to discover, memories to unlock that the game master has hidden, and this way the player can feel like the star of the game. So the memories is one example. Another example is this scene with the little scared boy who has a key information about a missing character. He knows where she is, but he doesn't trust you, doesn't want to reveal it to you. And you can discover a way how to figure out the location without hurting the boy, or you can use force. And basically this feels also like a discovery that you discovered, non-violent solution to a situation that seems like it warrants the use of force because a life is at stake, and it's just a rational child who is endangering this life. So this is our design focused on immersion in one slide. And the avert a tragic ending is a really important one because it lets the conflict and the challenge come from the story itself and not from other arbitrary challenges. And the last point, how to feel like a star, is that what I mentioned, the characters are rising and falling in influence in the story as well, and you compete for influence, so nothing is given to you in Sacred Fire, and that way you can feel like a star when you achieve it. I will just go briefly through production. We use ink, and basically each line is a choice or line in the game. And as you can see, there is a hashtag and a number, and then we pick up this tag of the line in Unity, and we set up the scene, all the visuals and all the game mechanics, what kind of fear, anger, relationship changes happen on this specific line. And it runs through all the game mechanics. So if there is a fear impulse on the line because you encountered a wild bear, then it runs through your resistance check. The game calculates your reaction to that impulse. So thank you all for your time. We are very thankful for the support of our community of backers on Kickstarter. There is a late backing campaign still going on Indiegogo, and it's not very probable because it says I'm in the 90 percentile of the immersion, so I care a lot more about immersion than 90 people in a room of 100 people. But if anyone cares about immersion in this room, you can join our backers. We are thankful for the support from Alienware, and we are in the final stages of receiving support from the Slovak Arts Council, so I found it appropriate to thank them for the opportunity. And if anyone wants to playtest the game, please feel free to run the survey on Quantic Foundry and send me your profile. And I will send you back a build of the game, and then you can write me your feedback, and I will know what kind of gamer profile you are and how to interpret it and make the game better for everyone. Thank you all. You can reach me at this email address.
Anyone who has a question, just raise your hand. I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions, and then we will continue the program.
I'm sorry. Okay. I played Age of Gods for a couple of hours. I really liked the art. And I really, again, didn't like the tactical battles. It was a slowdown for me. So, yeah. That was my experience with it.
Hi, so I'm from Inkle, and I was kind of struck all the way through. We seem to have basically identical goals, but the way that we go about it is really different in some really key areas. And I was really curious to know what you think how you kind of relate showing the player stats of kind of everything, or basically surfacing what's going on behind the scenes to the player in relation to immersion.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, so this is a good question, and I think the answer is it's a tricky one because you can let the decision in the player's hands. This is basically what we are currently doing. At the very beginning, before you create your character, you can choose how verbose the user interface is, how much of the information is exposed. But I'm not really happy with that solution yet because it feels like a design decision, and you shouldn't put a design decision on the player to make. But as I said, the source inspiration is the pen and paper role-playing rule set, and those type of gamers, they really like their character sheets, so that makes it an obvious choice for us to show them the stats, and we give them really, currently in the build, we give them nuance controls about how much of that is shown, how in-depth the tooltips are. So this is how we approach it. When playtesting, we found out and we established these 3 game modes basically on this, because some people said it's too much information and it's breaking the immersion. So we developed the adventure game mode that is showing less, and then we have a visual novel game mode that is basically not showing anything. And this is the current solution for the playtesting. And as we move through playtesting, I feel like we should come to a game mode that is final for the game and not let the player choose, and just maybe leave in the game options if he really has a bad experience with the game to adjust it there. But I'm really curious to talk about it more with you afterwards. Thank you.
All right, I think we ran out of time. I'm sorry, but I mean, if you have questions for Andrej, Andrej will be here for the day, so you can grab him, take him for a beer, and then discuss the immersion game. So, Andrej, once again, thank you.
I want to see the thought.
All right, thanks again.
Thank you.